One of the things Jung said about Christ in the Gospels, which I thought was indescribably brilliant, was that Christ, not entirely, but is presented as a figure of mercy.
Mm-hmm.
And Jung was wise enough to know that, and he used religious sources for this idea, that God rules with two hands, with mercy and with justice, because if it's just mercy, then, well, all is always forgiven and you have no responsibility and you're an eternal infant. But if it's all justice, then look out, because every single transgression you commit, you'll be held to account for in some infinite manner. And people are so fallible that, well, you kind of see that happening on Twitter now. You know, if you make a mistake of any sort at any point in your life, you're roasted over the open coals for it, and no one can stand that because everyone makes mistakes. And so there has to be this balance between mercy and justice. And Jung regarded Christ's return in Revelation as psychologically necessary, because any figure of perfection has this element of the judge, because any ideal is a judge.
Yeah.
And so
you can't bracket that in the name of because the master category is love, right? And not to be sentimental about it, love means to will the good of the other. So that always has a judgmental dimension.
Of course it does, because if you have a child or a friend or yourself, it's like, and I felt this when I was a psychotherapist, practicing as a psychotherapist. I mean, Rogers said, well, you had to have unconditional love for your client. And I thought, no, I have unconditional positive regard for the part of my client that's striving toward the light. And I am a co-enemy with that part against the part that's trying to drag that person down. And
Can I tell you that an entire generation of Catholic priests was formed under the Rogerian assumption, because that's what my generation got. Now, I mean, I learned things from Rogers, and the whole, it works in a way. When I was doing pastoral ministry and counseling early on as a young priest, you know, that whole idea of just kind of mirroring back to someone what they're saying and giving them I mean, I get it. But I agree with you. There's a severe danger in that. If that's all we're doing with people, we're not moving them in the manner of a spiritual teacher. I had a student years ago who said to me, what we're missing from the church is Yoda on our shoulders. You know, he meant Yoda on the shoulders of Luke Skywalker, instructing him and pressing him and telling him what he's doing wrong and how to get going. You know, that we were all Rogerians. We just were unconditionally positive regarding everybody, but we weren't.
Well, it's a great compliment. See, the other thing that's made me popular among young people, this is so perverse. I have a hard time believing any of it, really. I mean, the first thing that I have a hard time believing is that, you know, I can attract audiences of 5,000 people and tell them that the problem with their lives is that they're not bearing nearly enough responsibility, and that's where they're going to find the meaning that sustains them. Yeah. It's a pretty rough message.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, especially with young people, because the message has been for 50 years, and this is part of the humanists from the 1960s, is, well, you're okay the way you are.
Yeah.
And I think there isn't anything more damning that you can tell a young person than, well, you're okay the way you are, especially if they're suffering and nihilistic. It's like, well, you're
like, get me out of where I am. I want to get out of this state. You know?
That's right. They want to crawl right out of their skin. And so you tell them instead, no, look, man, you don't know anything. You're barely beginning. You're suffering because, in a sense, because you are steeped in sin to an almost unimaginable degree. And I'm saying that compassionately, not judgmentally, and that if you want to put your life together, you have to start small and you have to be careful and awake. And if you do it carefully, then you can eliminate these flaws in your character that no one should be celebrating. And people light up when you tell them that.
Yes,
It's so strange.
It was a real pastoral failure on the part of the church as I was coming of age, because we were reacting against maybe a hyper stress on sin. So my parents' generation probably got that, especially sexual sin. So I understand that there was a hyper reaction, but that is exactly the problem. Is you ended up with a generation of Catholics that felt like, oh, okay, God is love. I'm okay. Everything will be fine. So then there's no energy. There's no directionality. There's no sense of purpose. There's no sense of spiritual struggle.
There's no evil.
Right. There's no
Isn't that
real
the
evil.
problem?
Everything.
You're dealing with, situations like Nazi Germany.
Right. Right. But no, that was a huge pastoral failure. One was intellectual as coming of age. We became very deeply anti-intellectual, and this problem of a hyper kind of Rogerianization of our pastoral practice.
See, I liked Rogers a lot, because one of the things Rogers really taught me to do was to listen.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
His advice about listening and then restating to people what you heard,
Yeah.
so that
Sounds
they
like,
agree with you.
yeah.
That's unbelievably powerful, because it
Yeah.
does force you to listen. But Rogers was a seminarian, and he did dispense with the idea of evil and the devil fundamentally. And he fell into the trap of Rousseau, where the idea was that people were basically good. And that's just, it's such a devaluation of people to say that they're basically good, because it's clearly the case that people have an unbelievable capacity for malevolence. And to me, that's heartening.
Yeah.
I can talk to my audiences and I can say, look, all you guys sit on the edge of your bed and you think about all the things that you're doing wrong, that you know that you're doing wrong, way that you're leading yourself and other people astray. Those things will come to your mind momentarily, and imagine briefly where that would take you if you allowed your imagination to take you to where it could in its depths. And everyone nods their head because they bloody well know. And I say, and imagine just for a moment that if you have that capacity for absolute mayhem and malevolence, that the opposite is also true. Because if there is that darkness and that evil, then obviously the opposite also exists. And then it's also possible to make a case for people, that they can believe that good has the capability of triumphing over evil. But you don't do that by minimizing evil. You do it by maximizing evil.
That's right. I mean, I would say part of spiritual direction is helping people see what they're really capable of. And I mean that in the negative sense. Help people to see, like, I'm really capable of some really wicked business. And if I'm hiding from that all the time, I'm suppressing it all the time, that's not the thing. Because from now a religious standpoint, you want to say Christ goes all the way down. Now, that's the descent into hell theme, but that happens in us. He goes all the way down in me to the bottom of my dysfunction. And people like Dostoevsky are really good at showing that dimension of life.
Yes, that's for sure.
But if we don't do that spiritually, then we're not understanding the cross. We're not understanding redemption, salvation, that we're healed by this downward journey of the Son of God. But he goes with us. There's Dante now. There's the journey downward through all the levels of our dysfunction, till you find, I think he's dead right about that, you find some originating dysfunction. So the Satan, whose wings beat the air and create the atmosphere of hell, there's something in me that's generating all the different levels of dysfunction.
Yeah.
But until I find that, I'm not going to solve it. I got to go all the way down.
No, the Inferno is right, is that there's just like there's a hierarchy of good, there's a hierarchy of evil. And Dante places the betrayers at the bottom with Satan.
Right.
And
Cassius, Brutus, and Judas.
Because, one of the fundamental necessities of positive interpersonal existence, even with yourself, much less, or let alone other people, is trust, like essential trust.
Yeah.
And it's a form of courage. Another thing I talk to my audiences about is trust, because like we tend in our society to worship naive trust by making the claim that people are basically good. And the problem with that, and this is what entices so many young people into that nihilistic atheism, is that they're taught this idea and then they're betrayed very badly by themselves or by some other person. And that's the death of innocence. And so then they go from naivety to cynicism. And cynicism is actually an improvement over naivety. But it's not the end. And they don't know that, because the next step is to trust as a consequence of courage, and to say, look, I'm going to extend my hand once again to myself or to my friend or to my family member despite the fact that I've already been betrayed and hurt. Because by extending that hand again, I allow the person the possibility of redemption, and I open up a space for us to rekindle a productive relationship. But that's predicated on courage and not naivety. I know that it's like stretching out a hand to a dog that's frightened and barking,
Right.
and looking like it's going to bite. It's still the best way, if you're careful, to establish peace, let's say, with that animal. And the problem with the betrayers is that they take trust, which is the most fundamental necessity for interpersonal relationships, and then they violate the very principle of trust, and it undermines everything. And
that's why they're at the bottom of hell. That's why Cassius and Brutus and Judas are there. It reminds me of that story of Francis and the Wolf of Gubbio. Francis, it's like a dream, that story. Francis reaching out to the animal that's been threatening the town, and frightening everybody. But Francis has the trust to reach out to the animal, and then he tames it, and then makes a deal. If you feed the animal, then he won't harm you, and so on. But doesn't Jung say a lot of dreams when animals function that way, of dimensions of ourselves that we're kind of at war with?
That's a dream for sure, because what it means is that there's a part of you that's ravenous and malevolent and
not being fed properly.
Right, and that's often because you're not attending to it. You're putting it in a blind corner, and it's acting out because it demands recognition. And like, people do this with the power that gives them integrity. I've had clients, and I would say they were more often female than male, who had this particular problem, but who had a very acute and judgmental intelligence. Very, very bright people. But they were also unbelievably agreeable. And so their intelligence would report to them something that was not positive about someone. It would see around a corner. It would see a hidden motivation and reveal a negative truth. And the person temperamentally was so shocked by the revelation that instead of regarding it as a genuine insight, they felt that there was something wrong with them for thinking that way. And that's the same thing as keeping that ravenous wolf unfed. It's like the particular client I'm thinking about, I spent hours talking to her about what she thought about people, because she was a very pleasant person, and it caused her a lot of trouble. She was far too much mercy and not nearly enough justice. And God, her insights into the malevolent motivations of people were unbelievably accurate and deep.
Yeah.
Almost completely incapable of allowing that to be real.
That reminds me of, we mentioned the Coen brothers earlier, their remake of True Grit. Do you remember the young girl in that she's seized by justice? She wants to get revenge because her father was killed, and people are dying around her. Corpses are piling up because she's just going to get what she wants. And then, of course, she's bit by the snake, which has a certain archetypal overtone, and she loses her arm, but she's carried, after the snake bite, she's carried in the two arms of Rooster Cogburn, who's a lawman. He's a man of justice, but you find out that he's also a man of mercy. He's a man of deep human connection. And the story is prefaced by the line, there's only one thing in the world that's truly free, and that's the grace of God. And I just thought, it's that wonderful, so the grace of God is not just mercy and not just justice. It's the two arms of it. She's all justice. So the one arm is missing. Brewster's got the two arms able to carry her, But I think that's what we've been missing a lot in the church, is the two arms. We become just too much of a mercy church in a way.
That's what I think. Like, I don't think that you guys ask enough of your.
Yeah. No,
you're not giving them hell.
Yeah. No, I think there's something right about that. And that's the Yoda on your shoulder. So is there someone who's kind of pushing me and telling me and teaching me and bringing me on that downward journey, like the Virgil move, that you're going to accompany this person all the way down. Now, the importance, here's like Pope Francis is really good, because accompaniment, and the church is a field hospital, he says, for people deeply wounded. That's really right. And we got to accompany people, though, all the way down. my generation got, I think, a very superficial sort of, everything's okay, God is love, and you'll be fine. But that led to a lot of drift. And see, when my generation came of age and we got hit by life, I can testify, there's a lot of my classmates, they left religion in a heartbeat because we got a very superficial, childish, one-sided approach. But then life hits all of us inevitably. And religion had nothing for them.
Right, right. Well, and that's exactly when it's necessary.
Yeah.
And love is a terrible thing.
Right.
It's
harsh and dreadful thing.
If you love your children, you don't let them get away with anything.
Right.
You call them on their transgressions. Right. And that's very, I remember, this situation with my son when he was about 4 or 5. And I had have a really good relationship with my son. And I've always assumed that he had the capability to make intelligent judgments and expected him to do so from a very early age.
Yeah.
And, when he was 4, he was talking to me and I thought he was lying to me. And I didn't know because I couldn't tell. But, that internal daemon was saying, no, there's something that's not right here. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it because I couldn't let him learn that it was acceptable to do that or that I would put up with it. And so I told him, and this weird thing, it's kind of like Pharaoh, or it's kind of like God hardening Pharaoh's heart. I said, look, kid, here's the deal. I think you're lying to me. And we can't have that. But if you're not, I want you to put up like a tremendous fight here to defend yourself. Because if you're being honest, well, then I want to know that. But I'm not going to back off because I don't believe that what you're saying is true. And so I went after him, for a good long while. And it did turn out that he was telling me something that wasn't true, which hardly came as a relief, I mean, children do that, and it wasn't a surprise to me. But that love is, if you really love someone, you can't tolerate when they're less than they could be.
Right.
It hurts. And so when someone comes into the church and it's all forgiveness, there's no care there. It's like, what the hell are you doing? Look at you. You're addicted. You're hooked on pornography. You cheat on your wife. You're doing a terrible job at work. It's like you don't take care of yourself. It's like, what the hell's wrong with you? It's like, where's the real you?
Yeah.
And the person, anyone who is subject to that, as long as it's done with care, and not I'm better than you, which is a whole different thing. It's like, God, man, you're nothing like you should be.
Yeah. And if you don't do that, you're not willing the good of the other. In fact, you're trying to move into an easy space. If I'm nice to this person, he'll be nice to me and we'll all be happy. But that's not love. That's the kind of mentality.
No conflict. It's a no conflict conversation.